Hi, everybody. Well, welcome to Pastor's Point for June of 2020. Our story today takes us to Matthew chapter 18, and maybe a story that you've heard before, the parable of the unmerciful servant. Well, it starts off in Matthew chapter 18. Jesus is having a conversation with his disciples. And what happens is, here comes Peter, ready to stick his foot, firmly down his throat. Well, he does so. When he says, "Teacher," he wants to impress Jesus with his question. "Teacher, how many times should I forgive my brother?" Up to 7 times. If his arm reached that far, Peter would be patting himself on the back with that particular little number. And Jesus says, not a math problem, but he says, how about 40 times, or 47 times? What did he say? He said 70 times 7, 490 times. Well, that's not the answer to the question, of course. He's saying, keep on forgiving and forgiving and forgiving and forgiving. Because Jesus says that the heart of a believer is one who forgives. Because they understand how much they have been forgiven of God. So he didn't say 490 times. He said, keep on forgiving. And then he tells a story, the story of the unmerciful servant. Well, Jesus, in one of his wonderful parables, he paints a fictional background with some very very understandable images that people from that day would understand. And what he paints is this ancient kingdom with a king. And that king decides that he's going to open the books and he's going to decide who owes the country's treasury money. Well, the country's treasury, who owes him money, because it all belongs to him anyway. He's the king. And so as he does his figuring and consulting with his financial people, he finds out that one person, one individual, and how this happened, I'm not exactly sure, owes 10,000 bags of gold to his treasury. Well, just to put it in today's numbers, that doesn't have an easy kind of conversion table attached to it, I assure you. But 13,000 bags of gold, you could work your entire life as a laborer in those days and not earn 1 bag of gold in your entire income. So that's a whole lot of money. Somebody could work, like I said, as a laborer, as kind of a middle-class worker. Somebody like today, just your average person who works 50, 60 hours a week and makes $30,000, $40,000 a year tops, that kind of person, it would take them 10,000 lifetimes to pay back that amount of gold. Now, how that servant makes that much money, or was able to borrow that much money, we don't know, but that's not that important to the story. Well, the king hauls that servant, and again, it does say a servant, not just one of the people in his kingdom, someone who serves him. That servant comes before him, and the king demands an answer. How are you going to pay back this money? Well, of course, the servant begs him, please give me a chance to pay this back. Well, the king's response is, what would have been typical in those days, is to put someone either in jail to force them to release their funds, but this man doesn't have any funds to be released. So basically the punishment is to force him into forced servitude. What exactly that means? It means he and his family, his kids, his spouse, everybody will be working for the king as long as they live, with no chance of ever paying that off. So again, he begs the king, please give me a chance to pay this money back. I'll work as long as I can for the rest of my life, and I'll pay back every single piece of gold that I owe you. I'll give it all back to you, I promise. Well, the king knows this is absolute foolishness. There's no way that this man in his lifetime could pay back all this money. With that knowledge, the king is moved. He has compassion in his heart for this man who can't possibly repay this debt. And he says, you know what? The debt is forgiven. Not that you have to pay part of it back, not that I'm going to give you the time to pay it back, knowing that it can't happen. I forgive you this debt. You are free. You are debt-free. You are free from any responsibility to me. Go and be well, you and your family. What an amazing gift. And this servant, he goes out and I imagine he's skipping home, man. He's so happy. He's practically walking a foot off the ground. He's so excited. Probably eager to tell his family their newfound success and freedom. On his way, he meets a second servant. Now, the Bible's specific about mentioning a servant, and the 2 words describing the 2 men are identical. So you don't have a system where somebody's in a different financial class than another. These are 2 ordinary, in using our vernacular today, 2 middle-class men, 2 average people who are servants of the kingdom, and neither one higher than the other. Not in authority, not in position, certainly not in financial standing. Right? So two of the same. This servant number one meets servant number two, and apparently they have a previous relationship because servant number one says, "Where's my money?" And apparently servant number two owes servant number one 100 pieces of silver. Now, I don't know, you've probably heard this story before, but if you've heard the story told in terms of the 100 pieces of silver in a previous time, some have said, well, it's not a lot of money compared to that. Actually, experts will tell you it's between 3 and 4 months' salary. Personally, I don't want to give up 3 or 4 months of my pitiful salary. I know you feel the same. That's still a lot of money to us. But the comparison, what's important. I'm sure it was a lot of money to people walking around at the time, this 100 pieces of silver. But compared to 10,000 bags of gold, not even on the scale, right? It wasn't even part of the conversation as far as comparing the two amounts of money. 4 months salary versus 10,000 lifetimes. Not even close. Well, he says, what are you going to do to pay me back? Servant number two, understandably the same type of perspective. They have no idea how they'll pay back 3 or 4 months of salary. But give me time. I promise I will pay back every single silver coin I owe you. I promise. Well, servant number one is unmoved. And he actually grabs the man. He assaults him, chokes him, and then turns him over to authority figures that he will be imprisoned. Not even forced into some sort of servitude. He's thrown into prison to be tortured until he comes up with the money. Meaning what? Meaning that this servant number one believes servant number two, just as poor as he is hoarding money and is refusing to pay his debt. So it's double trouble, isn't it? Not only does he want his money back, but he thinks servant number two is hiding money that is owed him. Well, other servants see this exchange and they're disturbed, rightfully so, because they see an injustice, and so they go to deal with it. They go to the main authority, the king, and they say, we have witnessed this injustice. Servant number one, forgiven such a huge amount by you, O king. He's not forgiving. He is not understanding of servant number two and his plight to be able to pay back money that is owed. Interesting, friends, that not during this entire time, this entire story, Jesus does not even hint at the idea that those two sums are not owed. And both of the servants respond when they are confronted. They don't respond with, I don't know that. They freely admit that they owe the money. All the more interesting when you think about the actions of the first servant. So the king is enraged, and he draws that first him into his court. He said, I thought I was clear. I forgive you this huge debt. I'm no longer hanging it over you. I'm not punishing you. Because, friends, there's no way that he could have earned that debt. Could he have borrowed that debt? We don't have the details behind some of that as to how he acquired 10,000 bags of gold worth of debt. But that amazing sum, I forgave you that. And your decision to do that, out of gratitude to me, out of appreciation, you go out and find the first person that owes you a paltry sum by comparison, and you cannot extend forgiveness. I forgave all of that I had no expectation, no reasonable mandate to forgive you, and you couldn't even respond the same way to someone who owed you far less. Friends, a very clear story about forgiveness, isn't it? And I think in today's day and age, in this month, friends, if you would concentrate, all you Christ followers especially, but this is a good thing for all of us, is to practice the art of forgiveness. Now you might think, well, Pastor, you don't understand how I've been wronged, how I've been mistreated, how someone has used their authority against me, how some boss has misused their authority in abusing my trust, abusing my work, of how a family member has abused the resources of our family, how a dear friend betrayed me and did something behind my back. Friends, can I just say that the offenses of others committed against us are very memorable. Can I also suggest that our offenses that we commit against others aren't nearly as. And the problem is that we get terribly focused on what others have done to us, and we conveniently forget what we have done to other people. You know how God deals with that? He says, especially for those who, you Christ followers out there, you know the huge sum that you could never pay back in 10,000 lifetimes. The huge debt that God forgave you. Why? Because he was forced to? Because he was compelled to? No, because he wanted to. Because he loves you. And because you asked him to, he forgave you your huge debt. How are we capable of going out and extending no forgiveness to others who owe us far less? Friends, I would suggest there's a thought going in most of your minds right now, and you're thinking of someone who has hurt you. You're thinking of someone who has disappointed you, and those feelings are reasonable. However, it takes no guts, no ability to hold a grudge. Anybody can do it. And yet, forgiveness is copying the character of God. And so he asks us, Jesus asks us, to forgive and forgive and forgive and forgive. And the question on your mind, which comes to me as well, do they deserve it? Did you deserve God's forgiveness? I sure didn't. So it's something to think about. Are you a person who forgives? And the final objection might be, I'm not able to forgive. That person has hurt me too much. What they've done has been too bad to me. And I have no doubt that you've been seriously hurt in your life. The fact of the matter is, though, although we are unable to forgive, the Holy Spirit that lives in the heart of every Christian is capable. Turn your forgiveness duties over to him, and he will make you capable of forgiving the worst of offenses. Friends, we are called to imitate the character of God. Part of that is to be forgiving. Are you willing to be forgiving? Are you willing to hold on to the power of God to enable you? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. What does that mean? Everything that God asks of you, you can do with his power to help. Will you be a forgiving person? Something to think about. This has been Pastor's Point for the month of June, and we hope you'll join us next month. Take care.